Hello and welcome to part 2 of my simple inventory tutorial. Now in this tutorial we're going to do a backpack icon that's going to open and close when you open and close your inventory. We're going to have a panel sprite background for the items to sit on, and that background is going to dynamically grow or shrink depending on how many items you've got in the backpack. And I'm also going to show you an example event where we delete an item from the inventory. There are just 3 things you need to take part in this tutorial. You need a image of your bag open and an image of your bag closed. Those should be separate images, not together in one image. And if you want to follow along with me exactly, they should be 115 wide by 145 high, and they need to be the same size. So that's really important, because when we change the animation from open to closed and back again, you wouldn't want your bag to sort of shift to the left or appear to get bigger or smaller. They need to be exactly the same. I would recommend, if you're creating artwork from scratch yourself, start with an open version of your bag and then copy it and then make the changes to it so it's open, so most of it stays the same. Anyway, the third thing you need, the only other thing you need, is a rounded square. And again, if you want to follow along with me exactly, it needs to be 103 pixels by 103 pixels. And I've done mine slightly transparent. So if I was using this inventory system in a bigger game, I would be able to see my game artwork behind the square because it's transparent. But, you don't have to. It could be just, 100% opaque. Doesn't really matter, up to you. The corner radius, and this is important, this square does need to have rounded corners, otherwise the panel sprite section that I'm going to show you you won't be able to tell that it's working or not. The idea with a panel sprite is that we can preserve our corners as we enlarge a shape, and that'll all make sense a bit later. I'll explain panel sprites. So for this tutorial, the radius of these corners needs to be about 10. But again, if you're following along me exactly, it's 10, but do your own thing. And if you imagine a corner radius setting in Photoshop and probably other programs as well, is the radius of an imaginary circle that's sort of nestled up into the corner. Right, let's get going. Let's create our backpack object. So add a new object, sprite, and we're going to call this backpack. Add an animation. Our first animation is going to be called closed, and we're going to add our closed PNG there. And I'm going to add a second animation. I'm going to call this open, and we're going to add our open version of the bag. Just OK that, apply that rather, drag it onto the scene. And again, if you're following along with me exactly, the X value for this is 18 and the Y value is 15. And this means that all the things we do today will all line up properly as per my example. Over in our events, here we go. You'll remember these from part 1 if you took part in part 1. Nothing's changed since then, by the way. I haven't sneakily changed anything. This is exactly what you'll have if you did part 1, so don't worry, you can follow along from this really easily. So what we want to do when we open our inventory, we want the animation of our bag to change to open. So in this sub-event, we're going to add an action, change animation by name of our backpack to open. That's the name of our animation that we set up just now. So we can test that straight away. Let's just collect any old thing and press space, and there we go. Our bag opens. But when we press X to close the bag, nothing happens. It doesn't change back. So what we need to do is add an action here. I'll just copy paste this one. I'm going to move it above our variable change there because I want that to be the last thing that happens. And we're going to change to closed. So we can test this straight away. Just collect a few things, open and closed. Let's set up our panel sprite background next. So add a new object, panel sprite. We're going to call it item background. And we're going to use our rounded square. And the margins are going to be 10, 10, 10, and 10. Nice and easy to remember. And the default size is going to be 103 by 103, which is just the size of our square. You could use smaller or bigger if you wanted. It just means the size that it is when you drag it onto the scene before you make other changes to it. So we may as well just go with the size of the square, because I'm not going to change the height of this. I'm just going to change the width. So here we are. Here's our panel sprite. And if we stretch it, you'll notice that the corners stay nice and rounded and the same size that they are when it's a square. And we can make it taller as well, and the same can be said of the corners. And also you can shrink it a little bit too. Now, if I just make a regular sprite version of this square, and then I can show you the difference. So here we go, and I'll drag that on. Let's just put that back to its default size and drag it out. Now, if I drag out the regular sprite, you will see that the corners end up like that. So that's the advantage of the panel sprite, is you can preserve typically the corners of a shape. And it's really handy for buttons and other UI elements. I use them in my game, in my dialogue system, and in my inventory. And of course, because you can change its size in events, of course, dynamically, and you can use it for all sorts of different things. It could be used for multiple tasks. So unlike regular sprites that you might prepare them at a certain size because you need them for a certain job, and then you have to prepare another 3 versions of it at different sizes, with a panel sprite, you only need 1 version, and then you can just make it the size you want with your events. And you're always going to have these nice corners. Now, let me just explain. Actually, let's delete that first because we don't need that anymore. And let's also drag this back on at its default size. If you're following along with me exactly, you want the X position of this to be 92 and the Y position to be 41. And you also want it to be behind the bag. So what we're going to do is we're going to give it a Z order of 0, and we're going to give the bag a Z order of 1. So there we go. Now, let me just explain margins a little bit more as well. Now, these margins might be a little tricky to understand. You think, how come they're all 10? This, doesn't make sense. But especially if you've only ever used, if you've used things like word processors and stuff, where typically margins come from the left. But if you've got a web design type of background, this will probably be a bit more intuitive for you. But anyway, the top margin is 10 pixels. If you imagine a line coming in from the top, 10 pixels from the top, and the bottom margin is 10 pixels from the bottom edge of the shape. The left margin is 10 pixels from the left edge of the shape, and of course the right margin is 10 pixels from the right edge of the shape. Now, the areas that I'm highlighting here in purple are the parts of the shape that will be stretched or repeated, depending on the setting you used in the object settings. And the corners will be left alone. They won't be stretched. They will be preserved, retained as they are. So hopefully that helps you understand panel sprites and the advantages of them. So let's get on with the events for making it dynamically stretch based on the number of items we've collected. We need a new variable for this tutorial, just one. So a scene variable. So we'll go up here and you can just press V to get here quicker. So add a new variable, and we're going to call it number of items, and it's going to be a number. Click apply. Over in our events, we want to create a new event, and we want to have it right at the top here, and it's going to be an at the beginning of the scene event. So it runs once at the beginning of the scene. And we just want to hide our panel sprite because we don't want it to be showing unless the inventory is open. That variable we just created, the number of items, we want to increase that variable by 1 every time we collect an item. So what we're going to do here is we're going to change the scene number variable, there we go, of number of items, and we want to add 1 to it. So it starts at 0. We can just double check that it starts at 0. Yes, it does. So, and when we collect an item, let's move it up by 1 there. When we collect an item, it gets added to. So if you collect all 5 items, that variable will have a value of 5. So let me just copy paste that into each one. Because this variable number of items, we are going to use that to dynamically make our panel sprite the right width. We can close this group now to give us a little bit more room. And when we open our inventory, we want to show this item background. So we're going to add an action to this sub event here, show item background. The next action will change the width of the item background based on how many items we've collected. So I'll explain that to you. Width, okay, of our item background. And if you just type this in with me, and I will explain what it does in a second. Variable, number of items, if you remember, we just set that up, and times 100, oops, and plus 70. So there we go. And do I need to wrap that in another bracket? Nope, I don't. That's fine. So what does this do? Change the width of item background set to. Well, this expression, this sort of calculation here, it generates a number. And it generates a number based on how many items we've collected in our game. So let's say that number of items, this variable, is 3 at the moment. So 3 times 100 is 300, plus 70 is 370. So the width will be 370. If we run our game now, I'll just show you what that looks like. Let's collect 3 items and press space. There you go. So this is currently 370 pixels long. Now, the reason I do times 100, I allow 100 pixels per item, and I also, what do I also do? And of course, that allows for the bit of padding between them as well. Plus, I add 70 to the number we create to allow for just a little bit of edge there at the end, and this bit at the beginning as well, where it goes underneath the backpack. So you've got a little bit of extra shape there to allow for those things. So, and actually, I've just noticed that these icons, they don't sit too well vertically on this, so we can just tweak that. If you remember from last time, when the icons are created, they're created at this position. So I'm just going to reduce that down to 45. This is the Y position. Let's see what that looks like. Let's just collect one thing. Oh, that's not bad. That's not bad. I would be really fussy and put it at 46. Ah, that looks spot on to me now. So, okay, let's close it and just... Now you'll notice it stays on screen when I close the inventory because we haven't set it all up yet. Don't fear. There we go. That's all 5. And so it's perfect, if I do say so myself. And of course, we need to hide the background again when we close our inventory. So we can just copy paste from up here. Copy, paste, move it above that variable change. And there you go. Let's just test it then. Let's have a look. So I'll click the dinosaur, open the inventory, and yep, it's the right size. We'll close it. It disappears. Collect something else, open it, and it updates to the correct size. And we'll just do one more little check with the mug, and there we go. Super. The last thing I'm going to show you in this 2-part tutorial is a simple event that deletes an item from our inventory. So go ahead and create a new event and make it part of this inventory group. It's not a sub-event of anything, but it's in this group. And I'm going to just use a key press. Keep it really simple. Key press, and any letter will do. It doesn't matter. Now, in your game, there might be all sorts of reasons that an item is removed from your inventory. Maybe you give an item to an NPC, maybe an item is destroyed, maybe an item is used to solve a puzzle. All sorts of different reasons, and therefore all sorts of different conditions. But I'm just going to show you a basic key press. So we want to test a couple of variables as well. I'm going to check that the inventory is closed when we press D. So is open is false. I don't want the inventory to be open when we remove an item from it. Now, the second check I'm going to do is I'm going to check that we've actually collected the plant. We're going to do the plant. So the Boolean of a scene variable, Boolean value, collected items dot plant is true. So obviously we don't want to delete an item if we haven't even collected it. So what I'm doing here, I'm checking that the inventory is closed, and I'm checking that we've got the plant in the bag. And if those things are true, these things will happen. We're going to change a scene variable. Number of items. So remember our number of items that we created today, but this time we're going to subtract 1. So when we remove an item from our inventory, we're subtracting 1 from our number of items. And remember, that is used to work out the width of this. So we need to keep it updated. If we didn't subtract 1 from it, it would be too big when we remove an item. So we're doing that. And then, just for fun, I'm going to create the plant back in the scene again. So you could collect it again if you wanted to. So we're going to create collectibles, and I'm going to create it at position 200, 400. And of course, all our collectibles are inside this object. So we need to change the animation from the dinosaur to the plant. So we're going to change animation by name of our collectibles, and we're going to change it to plant. So we're creating an instance of collectibles, and then we're setting its animation to plant. And finally, the last action in this 2-part tutorial, we are going to set the Boolean value of our scene variable collected items dot plant back to false. So we to tell the game that we haven't got it anymore, so that we could collect it again. Remember, when we collect the plant, where are we, plant, that variable is set to true. Collected items dot plant is changed to true when we collect it. So when we drop it, we want it to change back to false, and then we can collect it again. So here's the moment of truth. Let's collect the plant, open our bag, and there's the plant in the bag. We close the bag and press D. There's the plant. And now we check that the plant isn't still in the bag. No, it isn't. So there we go. And if I close it again and collect the plant again, it joins the bag again. And again, delete it, open the bag, it's gone. So there we go. That's just a simple example of how to remove an item from your inventory and have this background shrink to be the new size, because it's looking at that number of items, and we've subtracted 1 from it, and it's being used in that expression, remember? There's one small enhancement I'd like to make to our inventory creation events here. Now, currently, if you press space and the inventory is closed, it looks through our structure variable collected items, looking for any child variables that have the value of true. And if any of them are true, it creates the relevant icon on the scene. But if you press space and the inventory is closed, and you haven't collected any items, this sub-event still runs. And it's not a big deal. It will look through this. It will find that all the child variables are false, and nothing will happen. It's not a big deal. And then the moment you collect an item and you press space, something does happen, because it will find one of them is true, and it will do all this stuff. But I like to keep my events nice and tidy, and I don't want things running, even something small like this, that don't need to. So if I haven't collected any items yet, I haven't clicked on any of these, and I press space, I don't want it to look through the structure variable because it doesn't need to. So a really easy way of locking it down so that this doesn't activate at all unless it needs to is to check the value of our new variable number of items. So what we can do, we can have a simple number variable check. There we go. Number of items, and we want to check that it's greater or equal to 1. So now, and we'll put it above that one because it doesn't need to check whether the inventory is open or closed before it needs to think about whether we've got any items or not. So I'm thinking about order as well here. I press space, and then what do I need it to do second? I need it to check whether we've got any items at all before it worries about whether the inventory is open or not. So it's just thinking about the top to bottom process. What do you want to happen first? And therefore, is there a load of stuff underneath that doesn't need to happen? And keep it tidy. So it's only a small thing, and it doesn't make a difference for a little project like we've got here today. But in a larger project, if you've got lots of sub events and checks and things happening that don't need to, that could impact performance. So as far as the player is concerned, when they press space with nothing in their bag, they're still going to see the same thing before. And then we collect something and it works as it did before. But behind the scenes, we're keeping things tidy. We're making sure that this sub-event doesn't run at all if we haven't collected anything yet.